we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I'm Una Hartzell-Baird. I'm the Director of Translation at Luna Language Services, and I have Tiffany Hansen joining me today. She will be helping out on the technical side as needed, and she will also monitor the chat for questions. We will go ahead and answer any questions you all have at the end of the presentation, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you all come up with. We also today have with us Becca. She is the American Sign Language interpreter, and her screen and my screen will be pinned during the presentation. Of course, feel free to make adjustments as necessary for yourselves with the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my video to save a little bit on bandwidth and kick off the presentation. Okay, and Tiffany, can you see my screen well?
Sure can.
Okay, fantastic. So I am really excited to share today's webinar with you. Thank you so much for joining me and for sharing some of your time. We're going to be talking about simple ways to improve efficiency and effectiveness with translation projects. If you haven't done so, would love to see all of you include your name, pronoun, your organization in the chat, say hello to each other. Likewise, again, my name is Una Hartzell-Baird, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm here because I love making translation accessible and making projects that can feel overwhelming to a lot of clients be one of the easiest things that they do in their day. I am the Director of Translation at Luna Language Services, and I've been with the company for just a little over 8 years now. So today, when we're talking about efficiency and effectiveness with preparing for translation projects, we're going to talk about 3 main areas: preparing the documents themselves, providing effective feedback, and then planning content with translation in mind. So when we talk about preparing documents for translation, there are 3 main areas that we want to consider to start with. So first, the documents themselves. What kind of software was used to create them? So some of the more common pieces of software we work with are Adobe InDesign, of course, naturally Word, Excel, PowerPoint, even Google Slides, and the variety of options available on Google Drive. We want to consider with documents also, are there images of tables that might need to be recreated, or just pictures of people that are there that might need to be localized? And likewise, are these needing to be camera ready, or are documents just going to be in a spreadsheet or for internal purposes? The second option, of course, that we need to consider is what are our languages, source language and target language, depending on what you're working on, whether it's with individuals who maybe have birth certificates or driver's licenses or passports that need to be translated into English, or if you are trying to reach a community that speaks another language, whether in the US or abroad, and knowing exactly which languages and dialects you're looking for. And then finally, what are the expectations around this project, both in terms of deliverables, like I mentioned, do you need a camera ready file or a simple spreadsheet that you're going to be using? What type of communication are you expecting with the translation team and project management team? And of course, naturally, pricing. So I created a handy mnemonic, and if you've joined me for the budgeting presentation before, you will have seen this. I absolutely loved the Goosebumps series when I was a kid, and so I used R.L. Stine as my inspiration to remember and create like a little checklist for clients to go through when considering the scope of a project and all of the things that will need to be budgeted for, and things that can cause either increased costs or delays on the project if they're not accounted for in the beginning. So to begin with, recreation. Does this file need to be recreated, or is it in an editable format already? So as I had mentioned, if you're working on translating a passport, you're going to have to recreate the format there because there is not an editable version of a passport that we would have access to. Likewise, do we need to have localization of images? So if you are working with consumers or clients who look very different from the images that are currently in your marketing materials or your program materials, adding more of the pictures of people who look like the community you're trying to reach to is critical. People need to see themselves in these documents. Likewise, source and target language. We want to be really clear about what language we are translating into, especially when it comes to perhaps more rare languages or languages that you personally might not be as familiar with. And then we also want to consider, what is the instruction? What do you need to make sure happens with these files? Are there parts that don't need to be translated? Are there parts that will have special reference materials that need to be connected? Likewise, how do you want your deliverables to be sent to you? Next, we want to consider what are some of those nonprofit, volume, or other discounts that might apply to a project. To make it really efficient for you, knowing some of those things up front can help to save on the time and the costs that can support other areas of your programming or work. And finally, we want to know, what are the expectations, right? What do you expect from the team that you're working with, and what do they expect from you? And we'll circle back to this a little bit more also in the next section as we talk about how to handle feedback effectively for translation. And when we're considering providing feedback, we absolutely love it when our clients are able to have in-house support of bilingual team members who can provide feedback on translation. Now, I'm sure, as most of you know, being bilingual is not the same as being a professional interpreter or translator, but it is still enormously helpful because internal team members will be the people who know the voice and the feel of the organization better than anyone else. And although most of the time we find that the feedback is about preferential changes that sort of make that adjustment to the voice or feel of the translation, it's still incredibly valuable because that is one of our goals, is to meet that on the same level as your source content. So I have a few best practices in terms of do's and don'ts when providing feedback. First, do provide it. It is so helpful. Like I said, we really love to have that and to really build out the feel for your organization's content. When someone reads it in another language, we don't want it to feel. I'm sorry?
Sorry, go ahead, Una. We just had someone that had a little extra audio.
Oh, okay. Thank you. We definitely want that feedback. We want your translation not to read as a translation. We want it to read as if it was written in that target language. And when you're providing feedback, please don't leave out details. Letting us know that a sentence would benefit from some changes is very different from providing concrete examples of what you would like to see. And it's super helpful guidance. Likewise, when you're providing feedback, if you're working in a Word document or something similar, using track changes is invaluable. It helps to save a lot on the time and effort of implementing your changes. But please don't use text color and highlighting as a way to reformat the document to indicate changes, as this will just cause additional delays while the team has to take more time to check on what the actual edits are, as well as reformat the document to make sure that it's ready to go for you. I do have some links for some helpful YouTube videos today. One of them is about tracking changes. If you haven't worked with that feature in Word before, it was truly transformative in my life when I learned about it, and it's something that professional translators use all the time. And Tiffany will post that link in the chat for everyone. Sometimes tracking changes is not available. For example, if you're working in an Excel spreadsheet, or even if you have a PDF you're reviewing or a PowerPoint presentation. However, many of these programs do come with commenting features. And there is a second video that we will also share from YouTube that does walk through how to use the commenting feature in Adobe Acrobat. So this is sort of the second best option if you're providing feedback. The third option in terms of how to format your feedback is providing it in a table format where you include the translation section, whether it's a phrase or a sentence that you are providing commentary for in one column, and then adding a second column to include your feedback. One of the big don'ts is please don't provide handwritten notes. It is so difficult to decipher at times and can cause additional delays in terms of implementing your feedback. Likewise, what happens is, there's a universal truth that handwriting is bad no matter what language you speak, right? We all share that sometimes. So having those notes provided in a typed format will be much easier for us to implement and make sure that we're not coming back to you with clarifying questions on the handwriting. And the last one, it seems like a no-brainer, but sometimes we all need reminders not to miss deadlines. We treat your project as extremely important, and we want to make your timeline work out. If we are incorporating feedback as part of this, then it's critical for your internal team members to meet the deadlines that we'll need to finalize the project. Now, of course, things come up, and especially bilingual team members can be quite busy at times doing their typical duties in addition to providing feedback for translations and translation projects. So we understand that things come up, and then we will happily talk about how we need to extend deadlines and make adjustments for the project. Oftentimes, our clients come to us because they already have content that they're using in English that they would like to translate into other languages as they are expanding their language access and working with communities that speak different languages. However, there is always new content being created at some point. And if you are in the lucky position to be working on creating content, planning that content with translation in mind is invaluable and will help make a bigger impact with your content. So there are 3 technical requirements when considering planning your content with translation in mind. You want to know, will the languages that we're translating into expand or contract from the source language? For example, when we work in translation from English to Spanish and Burmese, there's an expansion rate, which means for Spanish that there will be about 20% more word volume there. So if you're creating a document where it's already a very tight fit, there may need to be some reformatting done in terms of scaling down the font size, perhaps even changing the font in its entirety, or perhaps even changing the amount of pages that the document is, depending on the density. So planning with expansion rate in mind can allow you to perhaps simplify some of the language in English or rethink the formatting of your document to allow for that expansion to happen. When we're working in software or perhaps systems that are sending mass text messages, or we're working on surveys especially, then we also need to consider, are there a character or word limit, and to what extent do we have control over expanding or contracting those as needed? So again, if Spanish and Burmese have an expansion rate, that means that if those users are populating information, or if you're, for example, sending a text message in Burmese, there may need to be modification there if you have a character or word limit. And finally, you want to consider, is the language that I am trying to reach out supported? So is it part of the software that I'm using? Will it display correctly on my website? What does this look like? In addition to the technical requirements, I also include 3 social requirements. And these are areas that can be difficult to work through at times because they are so very different from culture to culture. And while we all tend to share these, there are so many variations that we can't really rely on them as something that we can use as a standard for communication. So one of the things in terms of social requirements is humor. Humor tends to be very language and culture specific. And so something that works in English may not work very well and may fall flat in another language. Likewise, covering sensitive topics, for example, death or finances, can be very difficult in other languages. So understanding culture and understanding how to delicately navigate these things is critical to creating successful content with translation in mind. And finally, acronyms and initialisms. Who doesn't love a well-named program, right? Especially when you have such a sweet acronym for it. And it's fantastic, it feels satisfying, but you always want to be careful about the other cultures that may be interacting with this and whether that word might be offensive or taboo in another language. So if you have the ability to create content from scratch and keeping translation in mind, these are areas that will help you make a more inclusive content. Ultimately, optimizing your documents for translation, this is going to help with your budget going further, increasing your impact in the community. But I can't overstate the importance of really valuing and understanding the cultures that you're working with. And that's an area where our team can help, and certainly additional training and just working within the community and learning more about the people that you're serving, so that we can avoid some of those mistakes and miscommunications that can occur. I really appreciate all of you taking the time to join us today. I think we can go ahead and start taking some questions, and I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
So Una, we don't have any questions in the chat, but I want to give folks just a minute or two to kind of collect any thoughts and place those there. One thing is, at Luna, I do a lot of our client management, a lot of outreach and education about translation and interpretation. And one thing that commonly comes up is clients wanting to save money on project management time by placing the language themselves into their own documents. Can you talk just a little bit about one thing that typically comes up that we provide a lot of education on is which languages that may be appropriate for, like Spanish, whereas maybe it's not appropriate for Burmese, and why? Can you talk just a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. Really, it comes down to what do you have the confidence to support, right? Do you have team members who speak those languages, and do they have the technical skills to do that work? So for example, if you're working on a website and Burmese is the language that you're using, a lot of people actually don't even know how to type in Burmese. They speak it, they can write it, but doing a Burmese keyboard layout, if it's something that you're not used to, is very difficult. Likewise, because there are a few different types of fonts used for Burmese, and they don't all necessarily work well with all types of software and all web platforms and browsers, it can be a real technical challenge to handle something like that. I would personally advise, in terms of being able to place language that you're not familiar with, anything where you could comfortably read it and know that, perhaps looking at the original, you see that, oh, this word has been cut off, or this sentence isn't aligned properly. So most of the time that means that any alphabets that are using Roman characters would be acceptable. Languages that use different types of characters where you might not even be able to tell if there was an error introduced would be really difficult to do that on your own. And oftentimes what we do is we provide post-layout review so that we can just double check and make sure that all of that looks good if the client has decided to do the layout on their own. Although a lot of times, once they start doing that work, they find it actually the opportunity cost is greater to doing the work themselves rather than having our team finish it.
Right. Thank you for expanding on that. So Tamara sent me a question. She said, how would we find out which languages expand or contract? Is there a website that explains this? What would you recommend?
So the information is out there, certainly. You can do a Google search and find a number of different websites that will cover the topic. There's not like a central place for that, but that's the sort of information that our team can always provide for you as well. It varies widely, and not all languages are necessarily going to have that information even available online, just because depending on the rarity of the language, there may just not be enough people out there who are doing the work to care to put it out into the world. So you can find a lot about Spanish, especially in the US, because it is such a predominant language. But when it comes to Burmese and Karen, there just aren't as many resources. So we're really fortunate to have an in-house translator for those languages. And so we can help answer questions around those and really any other languages with our linguists' help.
Thank you.
That's a great question. I wish there were like a central place where we could get all of this information.
Well, and maybe that's something we as Luna could put together just from our experience too. So maybe that's a new resource that we can create that may be helpful. Another question, one of the things that we run across really frequently when clients send us like a formatted PDF for us to translate for them is we end up spending some additional project management time asking for certain things like editable files or font packages. Can you run through just really quickly some things to think about for someone if they're going to send over a document that they may want to put together before they send it to us?
Absolutely. So if you are working on something that's been created in InDesign or even a PDF that was created in Word, it's always best to send us that raw editable file. And when it comes to InDesign, and I know many of our clients aren't working in InDesign themselves, but have designers or marketing companies that are putting together information for them. So going back to whoever your point of contact is and asking for the complete package, which will include fonts and links. And here, links are tricky terminology because they don't mean like a website link like we're used to. Those are actually the photos or images that are used inside of your InDesign file. And so having this complete package allows us to make sure that your final translation document mirrors your English in terms of its appearance. So we're not having to modify fonts, which can also take some time because we always want to try to make it look as good or as close to that original as possible. And that we're not having to work with low quality resolution for the images that we've pulled from that existing document.
Thank you. And then another question, we have had a lot more clients over the past several years that have asked for website translation. And there's a little more detail that goes into thinking about how someone's going to translate a website and what that might look like. Can you speak just a little bit about, one, how do people decide what to translate on their website? I think one common misconception is if you're going to translate your website, you need to do everything. But we work with a lot of clients who prioritize pages. So maybe how would you prioritize that to be more budget efficient? And then what are some unique information or details that someone needs to think about before, or as they're coming to us to talk about these things?
Absolutely. So you're right. You don't necessarily need to translate your entire website in order to have an effective outreach in another language. And I would say, what are the program specific, whether you're or product specific, if you're a company, items that people would need to know? And also, how do they get in touch with you? And that's going to be one of the most critical ways to release the friction between having something that's just in English and someone not understanding or maybe not making that next step to connect with you. Oftentimes, the contact information in terms of, learn more about our team, that's a really nice thing to have, but it's not even necessarily something that all companies or organizations do in listing everyone that's in their company. And it's not the must have, but understanding how your programs or services work is critical. Or at least having a page that says, we welcome, we provide language access. Here's how to contact us about our services and about our offerings. And you could even just have one simple landing page that provides that in multiple languages with your, phone number that hopefully you have either phone interpreting or perhaps team members on your team who would be handling some of those incoming calls to help make those connections online.
Perfect.
And likewise, when we're looking at how to manage the technical side of that content and the implementation on the website, Luna provides a full range of services, so we can do it all, soup to nuts, and handle the whole process of placing it in there. But and Tiffany has been so helpful in helping us develop this guide. We will provide you with a guide that essentially is a questionnaire of different aspects of your website that we would need to know about in order to provide a good estimate or know what we're working with. Because oftentimes, especially with complex or custom-built websites, there can be a little bit more of a learning curve, and that's something that we want to know in advance so that we can plan ahead appropriately.
Perfect. So we don't have any more questions in the chat, and we like to keep these short and sweet so that we can get people back to their regularly scheduled programming. So I will be following up with everyone who registered for this event with an email that will have the links that Una provided and that I popped in the chat, as well as a couple of PDF resources that Una has put together with some information that she covered today. And Una's information will also be included in that email. So if you have any additional questions, or if there's a project that you're trying to wrap your head around and figure out the best way to plan for or execute, we'd be more than happy to help you to work through that planning process. So with that, Una, thank you so much for presenting today. And Becca, thank you for interpreting. And yeah, I'll send out that email within, before the end of the afternoon. And if you need anything else, just please reach out.
Yeah, have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.